right, everyone. Welcome back to Motivation and That. I'm Natalie, your host, and I am joined today by one of my OG mentors, Stephanie, and I'm going to have her introduce herself in just a second. But before we even get into kind of why you're the one here, Steph, I just want to say this topic is there's so many layers to it, like so many. And so I'm just going to preface everyone as we're recording, if we're getting into something, high chance this will be a two-parter. And if it doesn't, that's great. There's still a lot of different sequences and sequels that we can get into with some of this, but it's going to be just an awesome conversation. I'm really excited for it. And so as we kind of shift into what the topic will be, which is their little cliffhanger right now, I promise, I'm going to tell everyone. Steph, you're here as a leader, as someone who has had a lot of variation and experience over time. We've known each other for 14 years. When I stumbled into a meeting with your boss at the time and you were there, and we were all and I was like, she knows math and I don't, and this is going to be great because I'm a student and I need to build my network. But Steph, you're now the boss of your company. You are involved in some awesome side things as well, with whether it's health and wellness, art, any of those components. And I hate putting labels on people. So I want to just toss it to you to kind of introduce yourself real quick, and then we'll introduce our topic of the session today. So, Steph, to you.
Oh my gosh, Natalie, thank you so much. And yes, 14 years time definitely does fly. And hey, Yins, I am so happy to be on Inat. And, as Natalie, shared, I'm Pittsburgh born and raised. I've, grown up in the area, and definitely mathematics is one of my passions. Leadership is one of my passions. But I've evolved over time, as we're going to talk through, throughout the course of this. And I'm really focused on educating, elevating, and empowering leaders within healthcare organizations and making sure that every single community has a hospital that remains open with high quality care. So ultimately, love working in leadership, love mathematics, and love everything Pittsburgh, including the Pittsburgh Penguins, including pierogies, and including coffee and everything else that comes with that.
Yeah, and we're just an incredible community here. We're going to talk about universities in a second, but I went to the University of Pittsburgh. We're a very close knit set of universities, so even it's not like this competition I find in a lot of ways of where you're an alumni from, or Carnegie Mellon, which is a name a lot of people know. We're all kind of intermeshed together. It's a 3 degrees of separation healthcare environment in southwestern PA, and even in the tri-state area for sure. And we often find ourselves running into each other in other areas. So it's not even just in healthcare. You'll be at the gym and see someone you'll be out at a social event, at a brewery, see people that you know. And I think people maybe get that feel from the Pittsburgh sports world, but it is real life for us. And I'm an hour outside the city now and still kind of run into those things where we're all kind of interconnected together. And I think it sets the tone really nicely for the discussion we're going to have, which isn't necessarily about building network, but it's about when your network and your life in general, professional, personal, go through what a lot of people probably think of as chapter changes, where you close the chapter, you move to a next one, but it came about in a different way. You and I were having coffee, and I started thinking about, like, I was fixated on an episode of Real Lives of Mormon Wives, because my, just secret sauce is reality TV on the side. That's my guilty pleasure. That's what I get involved in. And the episode I just watched was all about one of the ladies leaving the group chat, and this just debacle of conversation because she didn't even announce it. It was just she left. And like people were like, why did she leave? Is she coming back? And just the impact of that singular action of a click. And it got me thinking about all the other times in life where we've Irish goodbyed, we've left and not told anyone. It's just like, oh, where'd they go? They're not here. Or you make a big announcement of it. People think of retirements as exits. We think of career changes, relationships ending. I mean, it's just a plethora of things. And when I brought it up to you and you were like, oh, it's not just about like when I changed my career or I left that job and went to another one. And I had completely forgot that you had this whole life before healthcare.
Yes.
And And it's a great chance to think back even further because I think we have short-term memory sometimes with these things. And you got me thinking about, oh my gosh, let's go back to when we were like 18, 19, because that's when it starts. You that first major shift out of the world of high school as we knew it and into university life. And so, kind of the theme of today is all about I left the group chat, I'm leaving. Do I go back? Do you stay in touch on the side? When do you know you leave? And so, give me that kind of reaction that you had, what you immediately thought about in that story of like, oh, well, yeah, that resonates. And it resonates all the way back to kind of the start of things.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to throw a little curveball already. I'm going to go back a little bit further before I go to, the college era. But I believe one of the things that really resonates with people when you're talking about leaving the group chat and changing and transformations is the fact that it immediately takes us all back to the elementary school playground. And, when we might have been on the sidelines and not picked for the, kickball tournament, when we weren't invited to the birthday party in our class and everyone else was, when we were left out of the weekend. So I think all of these triggers in adulthood where we're either included or not included, oftentimes are related back to what we experienced in elementary school when we're just getting our ground in the social aspects. And what immediately came to mind when we were talking is I transferred colleges, in the middle of my undergraduate. So I started at Syracuse and I was an undergraduate there for 2 years. My initial, undergraduate was actually aerospace engineering. And at the time, I was transitioning into an education degree, and I could not really justify continuing to be at Syracuse with an education degree with the cost and all of those pieces. And there came a point where I no longer fit in with the environment. Yet I had my social aspect, I had my friends, I had all of these different areas that were at Syracuse, but it became clear to me that wasn't where I belonged any longer. So I had to go through the actual evolution of, okay, what do I do? How do I tell my friends? Do I communicate this? When do I communicate? When do I share I'm leaving? When do I let them know I'm not going to be here next year? At the same time, transition to Duquesne, where ultimately ended up going for the second half. And there was this period of time where I can remember the summer in between my sophomore year and my junior year where I had one foot in to the Syracuse world and was visiting friends in different cities because I wanted to get my last hurrah in with them. But at the same time, I was like, oh my gosh, I know no one at Duquesne and I'm going to be in a new scenario. So I think it's very interesting when we make those decisions. And in that scenario, I was both the person who left and left people behind and was leaving. So I think it's pretty interesting because you can be on both sides of the equation.
Yeah, and I don't even know if you know this. I did the same thing. 3 years into my degree at the University of Maryland, I was like, oh, I can't just become an FBI profiler because that's the thing on TV that people do. And now I've spent 3 years in a double degree and it's not going to turn out the way I want. And same thing, couldn't justify being in a state where I went because that's where those agencies were that I was so fixated on and came home, did social work, and then stumbled later on into healthcare. So we have very parallel careers, whether we realize it or not. But I think it brings up, so I only talked to one person from that time when I was in Maryland now. And I mean, well, two, and it's through social media. We just see each other kind of at distances. They have their lives, but that whole kind of part of life is this weird chapter of the past that's just kind of there. And ironically, for both of us, before you had the text messages, you had the social media at the extent that it was anymore. So it almost, I think it was going through that process in a different generation of technologies than we are now, where now as we I think see these same type of shifts happen, it's almost harder to make the break from that, and I don't know what that would have looked like probably for either of us had we had people that were like on our Instagrams and on our LinkedIns and sending us friend requests. And almost I think where we'll talk in a little bit about that, do you still have that pull to want to go back? Like, did I make the right choice? Do I have regrets about this decision? Because it was easier to make those clean cuts for a lot of us before we had everything surrounding us in the environment that we have nowadays. So Yeah, it's
It's such a different world, isn't it? Because you think about the group chats that would have been there if, you were transitioning schools now, and what that Instagram, Facebook, messages that would have come through, even with cell phones and things. You know, I don't want to say I had a clean break, but in a sense, it was much cleaner than it could have been today because, like you, I am not in consistent communication with really anyone from honestly either university. And, I think that goes to, relationships in general is that, a lot of times people come into your life for a lesson, for, a moment. And, you're very close friends. And I had very strong relationships in both of those universities, or they come in for a longer season or their lifetime. And you don't know at the time who's falling into those categories. But when you're pushed into these decisions of, does it make sense to leave or not leave? If I went back, would I be a different person today? I think all of those really can determine who you become. And ultimately, we can even go a step further. I would not be the person I am today had I not attended Syracuse, because it got me out of the Pittsburgh. It moved me out of my comfort zone. I had to be more social. I tend to be more introverted, standing on the side of the room in the corner most of the times, unless thrust into it. So I had to be more outgoing at Syracuse and became a different person, to the point that high school friends would have told you that they didn't know who I was when I came back. And I think that evolution also happened at Duquesne. So I would not be who I am today had I not made those changes. And I'm quite confident that had I never left Syracuse, I would not be sitting where I am today either. So it's just very interesting, the decisions we make, because it really dictates things. And whether you leave the group chat or you stay in the friend group, or you leave and follow what's passionate to you and follow what's true to you, can completely change the trajectory.
Well, and I think we both have an experience too, because we both could have said, okay, well, for you, Syracuse isn't it, but MIT is, or there's a college that focuses on education in another state. But we both made a decision to come back home. It's a joke I used to tell, mama trauma aside, where my mom used to say, there's this big black hole of southwestern Pennsylvania, and no matter how hard you try to leave, it never leaves you, and eventually you will probably end up back here. I lasted 3 years and then I was right back here. And part of it is we've got this really great, I think, revived culture that's happening in the area. We've got amazing education. So when education's the piece, it's like, well, no, I'm not going to go pay tons of out of state money to come back to a place that has really good universities. They have really good healthcare. They have really good education. We've got this kind of thriving sports world that just brings everyone together like no other business. But when we came back, it's not that you just fell back in with your old people. I mean, I'm still friends with some folks from high school, but it wasn't that I moved back home. And if you did, that was fine. But you came back in kind of that, what you're saying, a new sense of a person, because you did leave for a little bit. And so now you're in this weird state, right? Of you're kind of different. You're coming back to a place that hasn't had all that much time to change itself. So it's still very much the same. And now you're trying to find your new space in it. So talk a little bit about what that finding the new chat or the new group at Duquesne was like. And then it's a shorter time frame, right? So you're not going the whole 4 years because you're coming back. You've already got some credits under your belt. And now you're coming in midway to people that have already lived together for a while or already know each other, and you're the newbie, so you're a new kid on the playground. And what was that like? And how did you kind of internalize some of those experiences as you found your new place in the town that you knew best?
Oh, interesting angle for sure. You know, it was awkward because I came back into a situation where everyone had already formed their social connections, but I lucked out also from the standpoint that one of my high school friends happened to become my roommate in the new location. So I was immediately put into a social element where I was accepted into the group and was able to navigate, and that made it much easier for me when I was there. However, coming back, I thought I was going to maintain the connections with my high school friends because a lot of them were still in the area. I assumed that we would pick right up and I would, be in those conversations, those discussions. And because I had evolved, shifted, changed, I actually found myself left out of a lot of those invites. And I also had the situation where I did not turn 21 until the basically second semester of my senior year. So I was actually already student teaching by the time I could legally go to the bars with my friends. And for that reason, I was excluded from a lot of the invites as well. So I felt left out. I felt as if I didn't belong, isolated. There were many times where I didn't have an option on a Friday or Saturday night because everyone else was at the bar. My fake ID didn't work as well. And that that emotional, I'd say, situation really impacted how I thought about my relationships and friendships, and really how I determined what I was going to do. And I think it's interesting because you'd think I had a network coming back home, but it wasn't the same as it was when I left. And I think we experience that in a lot of different scenarios: when we leave jobs, when we change careers, when we move in and out of neighborhoods. Everything shifts and nothing's ever the same.
So, as you moved into that first career, which similar, I was tangential to healthcare when my first career. You were not. Yeah, I mean, teaching is healthcare. It is a social service as I have ever seen it, to get the, kids and nurturing and cultivate them to what they should be. But you ended up in teaching, and you ended up, bless your heart, in a subject that so many of us are just like, no. So what did you learn about yourself? You're coming from this aerospace mindset. You've shifted, you're getting into teaching. It's blended with a passion of math and analysis and analytics, which we know is a thread for you over time. But how long were you in that position? Where were the things where you were like, might not be the forever role? Or was there like a light bulb moment of just like, oh no, I woke up one morning and was like, this is probably not the direction I'm going?
So I was passionate about teaching for a long time. I definitely moved into that area because I was service driven. I really enjoyed being able to take something complex like calculus or trigonometry or even algebra and make it simple. I really thrived on taking the students that were deemed unteachable in mathematics, or they came in and said, "You're never going to be able to explain fractions to me," and breaking it down at a very basic level and helping them understand and giving them confidence that they could actually do algebra, and giving them confidence and leading them to the fact that they weren't bad at math. They may have been told that they were bad at math. They may have thought they were bad at math, but everyone can learn mathematics. So what I learned about myself is that I had that ability to break down the complex mathematical statistical concepts and make them easy to understand. And that really resonated very well for a long time. And I also, which you may or may not know, was the yearbook sponsor. And I taught with my mother in the same school district, and we co-sponsored together, which is not an experience that a lot of people have. So I'm very grateful for that. And we co-sponsored together, and our yearbook won a national award. So I threw myself into a lot of the creativity there too, and helping to have the goal of driving that yearbook to receiving the national award. And ironically, once we won the national award, once that achieved, it was like I started to think that I don't see myself doing this forever. So I achieved a goal, and I started to step back and look at, well, what's next? And it wasn't a light bulb moment, but I did feel a suffocation at one point, where I would walk into the classroom and I would walk into the school building and I didn't feel like I belonged there anymore. So there was a heaviness. I wasn't as passionate about teaching the students as I was. I wasn't as excited as I was. I was getting burned out, if you would, not because of anyone else's situation, but something was starting to pull me somewhere else. And ironically, I had a mentor at that time that started talking about healthcare, started dropping hints that I should go back to school because healthcare didn't have a lot of statistics. They didn't have benchmarks. They didn't really have any mathematics, and that someone with my background could really benefit and support the industry by being able to make complex situations easy. And that occurred for about 2 or 3 years before finally I'm like, you know what? I'm going to give this a shot. And it was basically a decision that I made where I'm going to go take my GRE. If that works and I get accepted into the program, then I'm going to take the jump. And I did. And it, again, it wasn't something that there was a light bulb moment, but there was a heaviness. There was a situation where I didn't feel like I could see myself teaching in a high school environment for the next 30 years. And because every time I looked at my future, I could not see that, I had to make a change. And ultimately, everything lines up. And I do believe that you're on a path. And sometimes that path can be a little bit blurry, but you're ultimately directed in the right direction.
Now, and as always happens on podcasts, as you're talking, I'm thinking of other, granular questions to ask. And you're talking about your relationship with the kids along the way, and it hits me. There's two types of kind of groups when you're a teacher of that sort. You've got your cohort of teachers around you who have different specialties by background. You're all in it from a service perspective. Your mom was there, so you had a built-in mentor. But then you've also got this built-in cycle of people entering and leaving your life, right? A whole batch of students over and over. And I wonder, does that almost build some immunity to? I understand people are built in to have to leave. They are by default there for a season or potentially a reason. And we see this in healthcare too. So it'll cycle where your nurses cycle through in a lot of ways. Your resident physicians are going to cycle through. You have interns everywhere that cycle through. And so a component of, are there lessons from that that you may have internalized, realized it or not, but that help understand that as a part of structure of professional and personal relationships in life?
I think there definitely were lessons that evolved from having that consistent flow of students coming in and coming out of your life and building really close relationships with those classes and with those groups, and then them graduating and moving on to their lifetime. And, every single time there would be a graduating class or you would have that happen, I can remember thinking that I'm probably never going to see these students again. You might cross their paths in the grocery store, you might see them in the community, but you're absolutely correct is that there was an internal mechanism of being able to cope with the emotions of having that cycle of people coming in and out of your life. And I do believe that it does give you a little bit more of a complex way to approach those conversations. And it probably made me a little bit immune to changing careers when I did, and the situations, but I still feel some of that even today when you think about the cycle of clients with the consulting relationship. We have clients that circle in and out of our lives, and every time one leaves there's just that little bit of emotion of something's changing. And I think at the end of all this, change is difficult. And a lot of this conversation's not just about the relationships and coming in and out of the group chat, but it's about human beings and our resistance to change.
Now, did you also go to that high school?
I did.
So you went from someone, and I'll just continue to go back to our metaphor, that may have been the topic of a group chat at some point, and now you're in the group chat because you've shifted from student to, teacher. And this is something we see across the board in professional organizations where you come in as entry level, you work your way up, you become the manager, your friends are now, you're the boss of them, and that's a whole shift in dynamic. Now, I don't know if that was something you experienced, but I mean, that's an interesting kind of shift in role, and I think shift in responsibility and engagement to have to navigate it. It's one that's really hard when it happens real time. I think for you, there was a gap there, right? You left for school and came back, but a lot of us go through that like right off the bat. It's like, oh, I'm going to apply for the promotion, and you don't realize that changes the whole
Yes.
dynamic of everyone that you're engaged with in that world.
Absolutely. It does change the dynamics. And all of a sudden, you're promoted into that C suite or into that manager and director role. And now you're not included at the lunch table or in the chat to go out for the happy hour drink afterwards or in the conversation. And it did happen for me. It was a little bit awkward the first time. I can remember being invited out for drinks with the teachers who used to be my teachers. Oh my gosh, I don't know that I can go out to, have a drink with, my mom's friends, basically, because now I'm teaching side by side with them. So I was thrust into it, and it's a little bit different, but it happens all the time with promotions, with changes in titles, and just the differences. And, I think when you're in that space and you're promoted into leadership positions, we don't necessarily give our new leaders the tools and the skill sets to being able to navigate and sharing exactly what's it like, because now you're in this new position, but the C-suite or your colleagues at the director level, they may not be as accepting of you yet, because you're also trying to prove that you belong to be at the table. So you're fighting for a seat at the new table, and you've already lost your seat at the old table. And that becomes a very difficult transition period to be in. And I think all of us go through it in multiple areas of our lives.
Now, I think professionally is the one place where we may have a little bit more guidance that could be offered over time. And specifically, what you mentioned about the lunch table takes me back my first, 7 years in the industry. We had one leader who, if you were a supervisor, period, you were not to eat lunch at the same table with anyone that could or did work with your staff. Certainly not with your staff. And I always remember going, are you kidding? That's where you get all the good info about like what needs to happen and what needs to be done. And I ate with interns. It was like, so there was a component of different expectations on what fraternization is and isn't acceptable. What support is there during that shift? If you're good and you promote and it damages your ability to lead by severing those relationships. Was it the right decision in the first place, or is that a culture issue of the organization? So I think it's a real great thing to touch on, because we'll get into potentially like, all my friends have kids. There's no one guiding what that looks like when you kind of get self-selected out of that if you don't have them yourself. But in the workplace there is, and I think that we tend to shy away from conversations about fraternization unless it's about romantic relationships, which are kind of cut and dry in a lot of cases, because they're icky and they're touchy and they're really hard to enforce. But you're in the consulting role, you see so many things from that nature, probably, especially when you go in and you do your interviews. You've probably seen them yourselves in the organizations you've been in. What are some of those components of guiding someone through? Are you supposed to be in the group chat? Were you kicked out and you shouldn't have been kicked out? Are you supposed to exit yourself and just be like, I'm gonna tell you I'm not going to be here anymore? Like, what are some of the guiding principles that we should think about in those instances, or things that you've seen that have worked well or maybe not worked so well?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And there are a lot of things that we can do to make that transition easier for leaders and to communicate in ways so that you do get the playbook, meaning that, when you're moved into those positions, these are the situations you should exclude yourself from the table, because you're now in a leadership and authority. And from an ethics and compliance perspective, you now have different boundaries. And this is a boundary situation that, from a leadership perspective, becomes extremely important for you to uphold and obtain. And it's not emotional. It's not that you shifted, but it's because of the fact that you've been prompted to move into a different position. I think from a structural perspective, when someone's promoted, the healthcare leadership team and the HR department can have that very easy playbook. And what we've seen work well is having the conversations with the leaders so they have clarity. They understand the different guidelines and situations and can have those conversations. I don't know if you've ever read the book Crucial Conversations, but it is, an easy one. And I think it's a great guideline for this too, because you can phrase different scenarios and situations that really lend itself to providing the new leader with the strategies of understanding when they should exclude, when they should stay in, what they need to do to transform, and where their boundaries are. And a lot of times they don't necessarily have that clarity.
I think too, really encouraging folks to think about perception from your best friend's perception to your worst enemy's perception. And that always helps you with what the spin could be, because there's a component of it looks innocent enough to you because you're sitting in it, but to someone else, they're going to be like, what are you doing? Are you going to give them time off before you give me time off now because you're sitting at that table, or you're leading your whole team differently so your satisfaction scores look better than mine, and I'm over here upholding the rule by the playbook. And the other thing that I think sometimes it drives when we don't support it is secrecy. It's I left the group chat and I started another group chat with 3 of the people, not all 4. And,
Exactly.
you've left out the one person. And so now you're sneaking around and you're concerned with getting, who's gonna, find out that these side conversations are happening or these side engagements. And I think, again, wasn't on our short list of topics, but being able to confront some of that. So that component of when do we just say, we're going to have this out. There's 5 of us sitting here and we'll take a personal situation, right? And one person is just causing havoc. And yeah, it would be easy enough for all us to keep our faces on and be like, yeah, we're here. And by the way, all the nitty gritty is happening over here in another chat box. But like, how do we build safety and confidence in being able to approach those conversations and just saying, let's just talk about it. Like, let's cut to the chase. If this isn't going to be what it is, to your point back in the university, like, this isn't going to work. It's just not going to make sense. Teaching's not going to be my thing. Like, how do we do that? What are some of the tips to maybe, I don't know, empower ourselves to not feel really hurt and whatever comes out of that, because that's when emotions come through.
So the first thing that comes to my mind is trust. Everything, starts and ends with trust. And, trust needs to be built within those teams from the beginning in order to have those confrontational conversations where everyone can come in, leave everything on the table, talk about it all, and know they can leave with things being okay. And, gossip and, that telephone game where one message starts and then it goes from person to person to person to person, it's completely different at the end, is detrimental and dangerous to all groups, all organizations. But it starts and ends with trust. And, being authentic and confronting it head on, like you mentioned, and just being real and having the discussion and the conversation. And one of the things that's also coming up for me is first lead yourself. You cannot lead anyone else unless you're leading yourself, and do what you say you're going to do, which means being authentic. So if I am leaving my office and spreading rumors or gossiping about the group and I'm having those sidebar conversations and I'm the leader that's actually perpetuating that, then I have to understand that when I'm leading in that way, that's making it okay for everyone else. And this was not in the script, but you set the standards for what everyone else is going to do. And I think confronting some of that head on and setting the bar by leading yourself in the way that you want to lead the group is important, because you're going to set the stage for your team.
And I think that's a great kind of shift into what's, I think, a little behind the scenes of this is the desire to stay connected with old self. I think when we were chatting, you called it the ghost of old self, right? And I really like parts about my old self. I like parts about those relationships that I have. And so I think nostalgia and, looking at those, we tend to really hold on to that. And there's a component of fear, which trust combats. But, well, if I fully let that go, what if I need to go back one day? What if I, need to reconnect in that way? Am I going to be able to? So there's this kind of graceful exit conversation that I think also allows you to, I don't know, I think of it like in the video game world, taking a skin off and putting a new skin on kind of deal. I'm just going to hang that in the closet. That's my old superhero costume version 2. And now I'm moving to version 3. It's upgraded. But how do we not because we can't fully move forward. As you said, lead yourself. If you are still tied to the apron strings behind you and you're trying to pull yourself forward, you can't do that with all of your history still loaded. You almost have to kind of offset that, put it in the file folder. So how do we do that in a way that doesn't trigger abandonment in ourselves or in those around us? Because that is, ooh, is that a hot topic for a lot of people, right? Oh, I'm abandoning everyone, or I'm going to be abandoned if I, don't stay supportive of them. They'll walk away from me. So, what are some of your experiences in that, or what are some of the things that you've been able to see and help folks navigate?
So I think first is you have to have grace with yourself and you have to have grace with other people, because the grace with yourself is going to sort of give you that bridge between who you were and who you're becoming. So you're putting the superhero uniform from version 2 in the closet and you're not going to go back, but you have to give yourself the grace that it's okay to become version 3. And that doesn't mean that version 2 was wrong. And it doesn't mean that everyone that was in your life with version 2 was wrong, and that they remember that they came in and they probably taught lessons and they were part of that. And you're not abandoning people when you move into the next phase or you move on, as long as you honor the relationships, you stay present to those that are still important, and you close all loose ends. So, I'll talk about productivity for just a quick minute, because one of the things that I'm passionate about is change and performance improvement. And one of the things that happens is you come into a situation and we automatically hear, well, we've always done it this way. And that comes to mind in this situation, because when you're thinking about that next phase of yourself and moving forward is, well, I've always done it this way. I've always had these people in my life. I've always had these, contacts in my life, but it's okay that they're no longer serving you in that way anymore. And you can move on to the next group while still honoring the relationship that you had. And it's a very difficult, I think, situation for all of us, because anytime we're cutting ties with anything, it brings emotions into place. And it doesn't mean that you love your friend any less if they're no longer in your, life day to day. It doesn't mean that the organization that you just departed wasn't important and that you didn't do fantastic things for them. It just means you're moving to the next location. So changing into the next phase of your life is important. And it's by honoring where you were and knowing that it's okay. And you're meant to do greater things. You're meant to evolve. You're meant to go the next phase and to continue to change, continuing to become your quote unquote higher self. However, you have to also be present and be mindful and be respectful of where you've been and who's been there along the way, and honor those relationships. So people aren't going to always stand your choices, but that doesn't mean your choices are wrong.
Well, and I think it also brings up this idea of, and I'm saying put it in the filing cabinet back there. You're still able to go back and reaccess it. And I think of sobriety journeys for this a lot, right? So people may exit because they believe it's not only best for them, it's best for the people that are associated as well at that time. And they need to go on their journey to be a better person, to come back and be involved in whatever that looks like as the new you along the way. And maybe they do and maybe they don't. Or maybe they're just like, I'm going to go do this thing. And if you decide you want to come join at some point, like I'll be over here. Here's my info. You know where to find me. And I've got a couple of friends that are on that path right now, and it's been tough for them because they don't miss that old life. They're like, I don't ever want to go back to that. But they're also like, I feel like the folks that were there, if they chose this journey too, it would be beautiful for all of us. And so they've got kind of this weird survivors, complex associated with they're feeling great about where they are. They hope to re-engage those relationships at some point, but it's not ever walking away for good unless that's the choice that's either made for you or that you've made. And perhaps I think that's also a muddy conversation to have with folks when you're just like, oh, I'm just going to leave for a short bit of time. I need to go deal with myself, especially for us that want to fix everything. And we're like, no, no, come back. We'll help you. What can we do to let people go on those journeys and let them leave the chats when they feel like they need to and not take it personally? So, I mean, we've mostly been talking about we're leaving the chat, but what about when other folks have left and we're the one that's kind of still back there? We're talking about giving ourselves grace, but how do we give them grace for what they have chosen and what they've believed in?
Yeah, and I'm going to use the word that you said, quietly, because I think sometimes the best thing we can do for people that we love or we've cared about or that we've had a strong relationship with that have chosen to move on or, switch cities is allow them to quietly leave the chat and have respect for that and to know that it doesn't change the fact that we had a great relationship and we're still great friends, etc. But the best thing for us and for them is to allow them to quietly leave the group chat and to go on and become chase their dreams, move into the new city, change careers, whatever it is that they're looking to do, go to the new organization because that's ultimately what they're desiring. And the best thing we can do is allow them to quietly leave if that is the situation. And, you might refer to it as being left behind, but I really like to not think about anything as being left behind. You're just choosing different paths.
And I think if we really looked at it with a non kind of biased lens, how many times do we go, I haven't heard from so and so in a long time? Or you're looking at that chat and you're like, someone's not added anything in here for weeks. Like, what's going on? You don't even sometimes notice it. And sometimes that's a sign in itself, right? Of we're just at different phases right now. And if that's what they've chosen, sure, maybe it's a check in on the side. Maybe it's a, hey, you doing okay? Like, we realized you haven't been around. And it's not that we forgot about you. It's just, you know, life happens. And I think sometimes we don't give ourselves credit for life just happening. And it does. And it is what it is, right?
There are only so many hours in a day. There are only so many situations and places that you can go, and life does just happen. And again, I'm going to pull back to the word grace. I think giving ourselves the grace to understand that it's okay that I don't want to say grow apart, but that you're in a different place in your life. And I always think about the situations you run into someone that you haven't seen in the last 10 years. And maybe at one point you're really close. It's, oh, well, we definitely have to get together for lunch. Make sure you text me. We'll do that. Let's get a date on the calendar. But then it never happens. And that's okay because, you're there. And so I've actually embraced in those situations having the catch up conversation, being passionate about learning everything that I can in those 5 minutes that I have and not extending the invitation because I know we're not both going to honor it. And sometimes I think we get more resistance in our lives by putting out those invitations and then not being authentic and following through them than it is to just acknowledge the situation, be happy to see the person and moving beyond.
Because you end up overextending yourself, and there's only so many groups you can be in. We joked this morning when you texted and you're like, this was really timely because there was just so much coming in. And there's so many reels and memes, right? Where it's like you put your phone down. I know I'm going to have one after this recording because there was some hot stuff happening. And I'm like, I'm going to pick that up and there's going to be about 80 messages in there. And I don't even know how far back to scroll to try to catch up. And it becomes really overwhelming in a lot of ways. And so I know in the federal government, people will go on details and they'll be gone for 3 months to a year. And then it's like coming back. So you're kind of different because you've had this massive experience. You're coming back to this place where you probably physically haven't seen people for a really long time. And now you're like, oh, how much do I try to even like retrospectively look back to, or do we just jump into here's what going forward is? So from that perspective, we've created a world where there's a running track list of everything that you could try to digest and internalize from that catch up period that you're just talking about. In those 5 minutes when you get them, what are some of the biggest things that are often like, I want to know this. Like, give me the short Cliff Notes version.
Yes. be present in the conversation, find out, how is your family doing, your kids, where have you traveled lately? Have you done anything major? Are you still in the same job and the career? What are you passionate about today? What are your hobbies? What are you doing? How are your dogs? So it's really that quick Cliff Notes version to just get a sense of where that individual is without, starting and going back to, let's definitely hang out. Let's make this. But I want to know they're okay. I want to find out where they're at in their lives. Have they made career changes? What have they accomplished? And so it's just a really present, authentic conversation rooted in the fact that I once cared deeply for the person or the friendship or the relationship. And I still want them to be okay. And I still care, but we're just in two different areas.
What I love about that stuff is not one of those things was an excuse for why I haven't been here or why have you not been around. And I think it's the beautiful thing of it's about, and this was on the episode I did with Amjad, the additions, not the subtractions. And I think that's great. Well, there's my chill moment of the episode. I have one every episode. But the premise too of while I want to know your accomplishments, I don't care how many patients you saw when you come to healthcare or how much revenue you brought in. When you said, I want to know if you're okay,
Yes.
are you okay after you were away from everything that you knew for the last year, potentially, and now you're back? Or did you know the new restaurant in town is open? That's one thing where I'd be like, I'll take you over to the restaurant. Like that's one thing I
Yes.
want to show you. But that I think we so often are in this world of competition. Let me tell you everything that resulted from this thing I did or this place I went versus, you know what? I feel really recharged and I feel like I'm in a really good place and I'm really happy to be back. And, asking those same questions, so that theme of the addition piece versus looking backwards in the rearview mirror to figure out everything you missed versus what's ahead.
Yeah. And ultimately, I want to know the person's happy. Are they joyful? Are they coming back in happy and joyful? Are they presenting? And I think when you ground in that, it makes a huge difference.
So I've got one other example that I saw on the list kind of that you sent over that I definitely want to hit on. We are going to come back for a part two that's more on the personal, like relationships, kids growing whole thing, because this has been a little more of that blend of personal and professional together. But one of the examples you had is someone's laid off during a restructure and their peers are trying to deal with it. I don't know if I can talk to them or not. And I want to bring this one up because, as lightly as I can touch on it, the federal world where I'm coming from is riddled with this right now. And it's going to happen with a lot of the changes coming up as we see a lot of the rural hospitals potentially struggling, and even the urban hospitals with the influx of patients that may have been in those outlying areas. And so there's going to be a lot of changes, and there already have been. And I think that that's when someone's kicked you out of the chat very, very visibly.
Abruptly.
And everyone knows it's not the silent thing of, well, we just started a new one. It's not you silently retreating. It's there's a press release out and XYZ number of people have been let go. They have been fired. They have been restructured. They're no longer here. They're working somewhere else now, if they're lucky, so to speak. What kind of different dynamic does that bring to the conversation when, one, the power has been taken away from literally everyone that's there except for maybe the decision makers? And how do you even start going about understanding, well, here's what's kind of next for that, or here's what's appropriate or not? Is there an appropriate or not?
I I think layoffs and reductions in force and those abrupt changes to organizations are probably some of the difficult time periods industry, organizations, healthcare, hospitals, healthcare systems can endure because it goes into a period of chaos. And, the way to navigate some of that, is if you're not in a contractual relationship where you are not permitted to reach out to the person, I always tell individuals reach out, check in on both sides. Check in to see if the person that assumed your responsibilities is okay. Again, unless you're not permitted to do that for a legal reason, you can check in and just make sure. Now, you can't go in and do the work, but just reach out, say, How are you? Are you okay? And in the same way, if your colleague that was let go and you want to reach out and, thank them for the, times that, please always do that. There's always a situation where you can extend that hand and continue the relationship, but navigating it is so tough because we get into the cycle of what can I say? What can I say? Is it appropriate? Is it not appropriate? And I have conversations with leaders a lot of times and do the right thing. And if you do the right thing, that's the right thing for you, the right person for the person that was left or the right person that's left behind, you're always going to come back from the ethical standpoint of clarity around that. But many times we move into that silent scenario. And when we move into the silent vacuum and we detach and I want to say, put up walls in between situations, it can become very confrontational, very difficult very quickly. And that breeds toxic environments. And it's those toxic environments that can take a culture of an organization that was very strong and that was, A rating on Leapfrog, 5 stars in quality. Everything's fantastic. We're so proud of our outcomes. The patient experience is amazing. Our employee engagement scores are fantastic. But when the communication is not held during those reductions in force, and there's not what I consider to be transparency throughout the organization and the ability to have those conversations, toxicity creeps in. And when that toxicity creeps in, you end up with negativity. And one of the things we talked about earlier is productivity, but in a negative environment, there will not be any productivity. And, productivity will produce positive results, but you can't have positive results in a negative and toxic environment. And that's what can happen when you build up walls during reductions in force. People feel isolated. People feel as if they have nowhere to go. They don't have anyone to talk to. And it just can be a situation that's easily resolved by transparency, by communication, and by keeping all avenues open.
And this will be the one I have no idea what your answer will be to this question. So I'm just going to ask it because outside, I've been very blunt with folks, whether I'm allowed to say it or not. I had NDAs when I was in the federal government, which was really weird that we had those, but whatever, we
Yep.
did. And I've had, a couple of colleagues outside, not even in healthcare and other industries, who have gone through some very touchy divorces from their companies. And there's been NDAs after the fact almost, or non disparaging agreement clauses, or cool down periods. And there are oftentimes, I have to wonder, especially in your world as a consultant, can those be more damaging because it didn't end well. And now no one can talk about why it didn't end well. So now the rumor mill starts. And now there's questions. And I don't know if I trust my boss because I really thought that person did a great job. And now you're saying they can't tell me what happened. Like there's all those pieces. And then we also have like when people retire and they announce retirement, and you're like, oh, why did you decide to retire now? And they're like, it was just time. And it's like, was it? Was it really just but you're still there to your point. So it's like, what can you even disclose? Or I'm going to resign. I'm resigning in 2 months. Like leaders have these long timelines. We see it with the deferred resignation program right now, 3 months, where it's like, I'm leaving. I'm not going to really tell you why I'm leaving or what I'm doing. And then they get a new job like the next day and you're like, you didn't retire, And so that trust piece that was at the heart of some of this, how do again in relationships where people have been kind of kicked or pushed in certain directions, what do NDAs do when it comes to transparency? When are they good to use? When are they maybe not so good to use? Thoughts
Oh,
on that?
man. Yes. NDAs. So NDAs essentially are there for protection. They're there for protection of the organization, protection of the legal rights of everything, and ultimately do serve a purpose for that confidentiality and protection of the situation. However, they can be very damaging from the standpoint of when an NDA is there, you can lose trust that the story you're being told is not the truth. And I think there is an opportunity for all of us to learn how to communicate what needs to be communicated without violating the NDA by being true to the decisions of the organization and what occurred without disparaging it and damaging it and really moving into, again, that negative, that toxic piece. They're there for a purpose. They have a right, but if they are too restrictive, if they cover too much territory, now we won't get into are they legal or are they not legal. That's an entirely different scenario and situation. They're there to protect and to serve a purpose, but it does definitely prohibit you from sharing the truth. And I can think about various situations where I've had a couple NDAs where I was not able to answer the questions that I needed to answer whenever directly asked. But it was out of protection for the relationship, out of protection for the situation. And when are they appropriate, when they are not appropriate? I don't know. I believe as a society, we overuse them. And we throw an NDA on everything, and we allow it to give us the right to make horrible decisions and at certain places do things that we know are not in alignment with what we should be doing. And we use the NDA as a cover to hope that the truth never comes out. And in that situation, I feel it's definitely more damaging than it is. Now, if it is just there to protect your decision, protect the organization's decision, we got into a really horrible scenario. We are bleeding $2 million a month. We cannot afford to continue at the rate that we're going to lose $20 to $25 million. It would force our hospital to shut down. Okay, there's a point in time that there are certain things that the general public does not need to know the nitty gritty of what the decisions were made. But if the NDA is put in place to cover bad behavior, to cover inappropriate relationships, to cover violations of laws that never should have been in place in the first place, and the people that you're asking to sign those fully know that those laws were broken, that those violations occurred, that fraud was there in those situations. Now you're asking them to violate their ethical makeup by keeping the truth hidden. And that can become a very, very dangerous scenario for all involved. And that probably was not necessarily the answer you expected. And I wasn't even sure what I was going to say.
Well, and I think that's really, and for folks listening to the pod, I haven't even talked about, being an ethics and compliance professional behind the scenes, but it's why what we touched on, the culture of where you are being so important, because honestly, we shouldn't be talking about those boardroom decisions, full stop, period. From a business ethics standpoint, I don't need an NDA to tell me that I shouldn't be doing that. That is how you teach your leaders, how you empower your leaders, how you set the expectations with your staff, and taking it back to kind of where we've been, setting your expectations of what to expect from the group chat that you're in, because they're not all the same. Can I swear in this chat? Can I swear on this podcast? Can I do those basic kind of rules of behavior and expectations? And when they're then not performing how you expected, then that becomes the conversation of, has the chat changed? Have I changed? Has something else changed? And every time there's a change, we're partnered with the decision of, is this going to continue to be where I am, what I'm doing, what I'm focused on? So thank you for going on that tangent with me, because I just thought it was, one of those things of, sometimes they're like, don't bring this up in the group chat. Don't talk about this. And it's just like an unofficial NDA that you get with someone on the side, and then you create this kind of lack of trust side of things. So somehow we've talked about this for an hour already, Steph. I don't know how that's possible. And I want to give you a chance to talk about Altius Healthcare Consulting, your group, and how some of these practices, whether they are things that we've kind of learned in our personal life, things that we have seen through other engagements, how that can be ingested and embedded into how you guys deliver your services, or how any organization can deliver their services or their engagements when they're entering, when they're exiting, or they're trying to build a long-term relationship.
Absolutely. Well, we've talked a lot about exiting and entering, and ultimately all of that relates to transformation. So, what we really do is transform organizations, transform leaders, and turn them into the better version of themselves. So, again, what individual leaders and organizations are doing now is not wrong. If you have a length of stay that's twice as long as the average, it doesn't mean that the organization's broken, but something needs fixed. So what I like to talk about a lot, Natalie, from our Altius perspective, is that the data is just data. It's what it tells us is important. And if we lean into that during our conversations with curiosity, now we can transform and fix things. So we really focus on those entries and exits through a productivity lens and through the lens of understanding where the department's performing now, but ultimately, what's the one or two things that we can change to make it perform better tomorrow? And we don't want to fix everything all at once. We don't want to completely drop the group chat and exit. We just want to turn one lever. And if we can turn one dial and move one thing forward and take that one step to improve our first case start time, to improve the turnover time, to make the patient experience better, to train our leaders how to have the crucial conversations, we can completely transform the organization into a culture of excellence. So how this all relates into leaving the group chat, entering and exiting, through our role is every conversation, every client engagement's a transformation. And we're ultimately transforming into becoming the next version and moving into that next group chat and making sure that no one's left behind. So it's educating, empowering, elevating. If you think about it kind of like, Brene Brown, coming in with the strategy and coming in with a leadership, but then we also have the playbooks, so that we're really dictating out what that playbook looks like. It's really that combination of that leadership edge and the sports playbook to really take the organizations to the next level. And I truly and strongly believe that every hospital and every healthcare organization can be a championship team with a culture of excellence, and they should all have 5 stars. But you have to be willing to look at what's not working to evolve into what you can become.
I think that's a great kind of note to sum things up on, and I'll just drive home the curiosity component because so often we're in these scenarios where someone says something and our first jump is to a reaction and not to a question. And I think, especially in the world of different ways that we exchange information, written versus oral versus in person versus virtual, that can get back to that toxicity piece. So instead of kind of having those moments of I'm out and clicking leave, unfollow, whatever it might be, maybe be able like, but why? Or what if? And maybe that reinforces the decision that we ultimately may make, whether it be professional, whether it be personal. And so I think along with that, it's great because at the end of every episode, I ask the guest and myself and everyone listening to take a deep breath, just kind of remember the thing from the episode that they really engaged with. And for me, it is I'm going to take a deep breath and I'm going to remind myself to take a deep breath before I answer the next 25 messages that are probably on this group chat waiting for me when I hang up the phone. So, Stephanie, if you'll indulge me, take a big deep breath with us. Let's think about what we talked about today. And so we'll breathe in and out. And take a second for what's the one message you want to leave the listeners with from this segment that we had today. We'll be back for another, but the one final kind of close out.
Be curious, not critical.
That's a new
So
tagline for someone out there, Steph. You might want to trademark
yeah,
it.
be be curious, not critical. That's what
I
I'll
love
leave
it.
everyone with today. And I played off of your curiosity and everything that we've been talking about. So when someone leaves, moves on, or you're in that situation, be curious and don't be critical.
I love it. Well, Stephanie, CEO of Altius Healthcare Consulting, thank you so much for coming on today, being a part of this conversation. We're going to have you back because there's a whole set of things we can still unpack that are related to this and interwoven and honestly impact how we act in these kind of more professional situations and kind of how we develop over time. So thrilled to have you, thrilled to have you back. And for anyone that's interested, Steph's Group is a great boutique consulting firm here in Pittsburgh, personal touch, but they go everywhere. So if you are in Oregon, if you are in Minnesota, Florida, their information's out there. We'll tag them in the summary of today's episode, and reach out, get involved, and think about different ways that we can approach the same conversation, or different questions that we can ask, and to look about the additions, not the subtractions, the way forward, not the way backward. So thanks again, and we will talk soon.
Natalie, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to be on Motivation and that.
Thanks.